Hello and welcome. You've found the Social Work Podcast. My name's Jonathan Singer, and I'll be your host as we explore all things social work. Hey there, podcast listeners. Jonathan here. That sound? Me breathing through a straw. That sound? That's today's guest coughing. And if it doesn't make sense, hang in. It will. Today's episode of the Social Work Podcast is about cystic fibrosis, or CF. We're looking at CF in two parts. In part one, we learn about this chronic terminal illness. And in part two, we learn about what social workers can do when working with people with CF. If you're like me, you've probably heard of cystic fibrosis, but don't really know much about it. So here's a quick overview. There are about 30,000 people in the United States with cystic fibrosis, 75% of whom were diagnosed as babies, and half of whom are over the age of 18. Now, the importance of this number will become clear in a minute. CF is a genetic, progressive, chronic disease. People are born with it. The disease causes the body to produce this thick and sticky mucus in the lungs, and it wreaks havoc on the digestive system, the pancreas, bone density, and other functions of the body. Now, because of this thick mucus in the lungs, people often describe having CF like breathing through a straw. And this mucus leads to chronic lung infection, loss of lung functioning, disability, and death. In the 1980s, children born with CF could expect to live until they were about 12 years old. Now, the life expectancy for someone born with CF in 2014 is 38 years old. And that's kind of amazing. Treatment for CF includes daily medications, breathing treatments, and chest physical therapy in the form of a mechanized vest that helps break up the mucus. And in some cases, people with CF need lung transplants. So, those are the stats. But what does it mean to live with CF, and what should social workers know about working with people with CF? Well, I'm delighted to say that for today's episode of the Social Work Podcast, I found the ideal guest. Elizabeth Shuman is a licensed clinical social worker who works as a social worker at the Grove School in Madison, Connecticut. And she also has cystic fibrosis. You might have seen her profiled with her friend Nicole Burke on the Today Show in June 2014, talking about the nonprofit they started to raise awareness for CF called OutRun38.org. Members of OutRun38.org and the wildly popular Facebook group Outrun the Odds raise awareness for cystic fibrosis by running, biking, swimming, and walking. And Outrun 38 is a beautiful example of how one person can make all the difference in someone else's life. Just a little background about the group, because Liz and I don't talk about this on the interview, but we talked about it off camera. So Nicole started this group for Liz during one of Liz's hospitalizations for CF. Initially, the goal was to get a few running friends together to collectively run 3,800 miles by Liz's 38th birthday, which was a couple months away. Now, quick quiz. Why would 38 be such a big deal birthday for Liz? That's right, because people with CF are not expected to live past 38, at least today. So Nicole started the Facebook group Outrun the Odds, and after 9 days, there were over 1,000 members who had already run 3,800 miles. As of September 1st, 2014, there were over 5,300 members who've logged enough miles to travel the Earth 8 times over. And if you're interested in learning more about Outrun the Odds, Liz is going to talk a little bit more about it at the end of the interview. Now, in the first half of the interview, Liz talks about the experience of living with cystic fibrosis. In the second half, which is about 22 minutes in, Liz talks about what social workers should know. Now, even though Liz is talking about one specific chronic physical condition, cystic fibrosis, I feel like her recommendations apply to social work with people with a broad array of chronic physical and mental illnesses. People with chronic conditions experience significant loss, not just big loss like the permanent physical disability of, say, a lung transplant, but losses that people without a chronic illness might not recognize as a loss, such as not being able to attend a party. And as a result, grief work is an essential skill for social workers with these populations. Now, Liz coins the term healthy sick to describe people, like herself, who are healthy enough to be productive and independent members of society, as long as they're also able to manage the part of them that is sick. Liz points out that there's not really a place in society these days for the healthy sick. Employers, insurance companies, even friends and family would rather see the person as either healthy or sick, but not both. That said, the Grove School supports her in every way possible in her healthy sick CF journey. We end our interview with Liz talking about decisions that healthy sick people have to make before coming out to others about their condition. And we talk about running and the ways in which this activity, which for many years people thought was contraindicated for people with CF, is in fact one of the things that is extending the life expectancy. Now, before we get to episode 89 of the Social Work Podcast, Healthy Sick, Outrunning Cystic Fibrosis, an interview with Elizabeth Shuman, I want to give a little historical context for CF. It's the summer of 1952. New York City is in the throes of yet another brutal heat wave. Over 40 people will die of heat stroke in a matter of weeks, a record that will stand for another 60 years. The emergency rooms are swamped with people suffering from heat-related problems, and a young physician at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center, Dr. D. Sanagnis, notices something troubling about the children who are being admitted for heat stroke. Lots of them have cystic fibrosis, far more than he would expect, given that CF is a rare disease. So why were kids with CF so much more affected by the heat? Well, as it turns out, it was salt. Children with CF had sweat that was up to 6 times as salty as kids without CF. And this discovery led to one of the most simple, accurate, and non-invasive medical diagnostic tests ever, the sweat test for diagnosing CF. And that's where we begin our interview with Liz, with a sweat test.
So we actually produce too much salt, and that's actually how they test us. It's called the sweat test. And I can remember being about 7 years old, and they put this band around my arm, and you're like, your arm is getting all sweaty, and they actually measured the salt in your sweat. And if you're over a certain amount, that is what qualifies you as having CF. Now they can actually test your blood type and actually find out what type of mutation you have, and there's actually like hundreds of different types of mutations.
So how does sort of making too much salt translate into gunk in your lungs?
I mean, this is sort of what they're all trying to figure out.
So people don't really know?
I mean, I think probably the experts really have it under control, but it's something around the protein in our lungs. But there's still really a lot of questions as to why our lungs really do what we do. Because another big issue with our lungs is that we actually colonize bacteria in our lungs. So let's say you have pneumonia or you get some sort of bug that causes you to have a hard time breathing. When you get better, your lungs will actually be done with that bug. It's gone. You took your antibiotics and you're done. For a CF person, it actually colonizes and stays in our lungs. And so sometimes it's active and sometimes it's dormant. And sometimes you might be able to, with like serious rounds of antibiotics, maybe it'll go away, but really it usually comes back. And so part of the dilemma is not only do we have these bacteria that colonize in our lungs, But because we take so many antibiotics through the years, we then become medication resistant. So our bacteria, this is where it gets really scary, is they become resistant to all antibiotics. And that's really when we're looking at lung transplant, and really looking at CF becoming a fatal disease. For example, like my story is like a couple years ago, I became resistant to all oral antibiotics. So when I used to get sick, it was like, I could go on Cipro, I could go on Bactrim, whatever, and 2 weeks, I'd be fine. Now it requires going into the hospital, getting a PICC line, which is like a temporary IV, and for 2 weeks, I'm doing round-the-clock IV treatments.
And so why would are you clearing your lungs out?
Yeah, exactly.
If I was interviewing somebody without CF, I'd probably edit that out. But
Right.
This is part of the story, right?
Exactly. So, it's funny because I can remember being like, maybe like 9 or 10 years old, and my family would take us to church every Sunday, and my friend who'd be up in the balcony, he would turn around and go, "Oh, Elizabeth is here." "Oh, how do you know?" "I can hear her coughing." It's we tend to cough a lot. A lot of people will say, "Oh," like people who don't know I have CF, like, "Oh, you have a cold in the summertime? That's so weird." I'm like, "Yeah, I know, weird, right?"
You're like, "Oh, if only it were a cold in the
only it were a
summertime,
cold."
that would be great."
Right.
Okay, so what sort of things would land you in the hospital?
Well, pneumonia, any type of lung infection I have. So basically, I culture some pretty common CF bacterias might be Pseudomonas, Staph, MRSA. I have colonized Pseudomonas and Staph in my lungs, so I always have them in my lungs, which sounds sort of crazy, right?
It sounds really crazy that even when you're not like symptomatic, you're just walking around with that.
Exactly. And so Pseudomonas is one of those bacteria that researchers are really interested in. Like, why are CFers, like, I would say probably 80% or more CFers have the Pseudomonas, and it's really difficult to treat, and it really causes a lot of problems. So that's definitely one bacteria that they're really studying and trying to get a better hold of and understand better.
And so after 2 weeks in the hospital, you've been getting antibiotics and that sort of stuff, and it goes away?
No, I mean,
not the bacteria, but
Yeah.
because that's always in you, but like the symptoms, like what happens at the end?
Yeah, so basically CF is something I have to manage every single day. So when I was a little girl and I was diagnosed, my mom every night would sit me down and have to pound my back for like a half an hour. I hated it. But my mom was like really sweet. She would always say, "I'll give you a little massage afterwards." And that was like my reward for putting up with her banging on my back. I mean, I have like big bruises on my back.
That's serious banging.
Yeah, she was, we have really thick mucus. And so you're banging your lungs to try to get it moving, because if you don't move it, that's when the bacteria really starts staying and your lung function starts going down. We want to try to get rid of that mucus as best we can and get it moving. So airway clearance is probably a term that people have heard of when it comes to cystic fibrosis. And the airway clearance used to be postural drainage. That is what the term was when people were hitting our backs. Now, what's really interesting, when I was younger, there was no such thing as an adult clinic. Because when I was diagnosed, the life expectancy was 12.
Oh my God. And you were 7. Is
Yep.
that what you...
Yeah.
So when you were 7, your parents heard she could be dead in 5 years.
Yes. My dad actually had 4 cousins in one family. There were 4 kids, and all 4 kids had CF, and they all had passed away at an early age. So my dad's recollection of CF is that not only is this a chronic disease, this is a fatal disease. And so so when I was diagnosed, the life expectancy was 12. Today, the life expectancy is 38. That's huge. And that is absolutely, no questions asked, a direct result of people making donations to causes for cystic fibrosis, and all the doctors and researchers who've been just, as I see it, just miracle workers If it wasn't for them, I would not be alive today. And I know that. And so when I had gone to college was really the first year that adult CF clinics really opened up in the United States.
So what do you mean by adult CF clinic? Just a place that treats adults with CF?
I mean, I was, even in my early 20s in college, I was still going to the children's hospital. I was in the children's, unit when I would go inpatient. It wasn't an adult disease.
Yeah. And the little robes probably didn't fit you at all.
Right.
So you've grown up, or CF has grown up with you.
Yeah, I would say I've been riding the wave of CF technology and advances. I have just happened to be hitting the life, expectancy as I've been getting older. The life expectancy has been getting older. So here I am, 37, going on 38, and the life expectancy is 38. So
wait, what is that like? To have a disease where the life expectancy is like your age?
Yeah. Well, I've always thought that growing up with CF has had a silver lining for me because I grew up with a great appreciation for life. And I think it's a really special thing to even be a kid, a teenager, a young adult, really appreciating each moment, and the moments that I can appreciate are just some probably really silly, ridiculous moments to someone else. But to me, it was like, wow, I'm here doing this. Like, I really remember being at like a fraternity party in college and just like looking up to God and going, thank you, God, this is awesome. And the floors are disgusting and it's dirty and it's gross. And I was thinking, oh, I'm having the time of my life. This is amazing.
So you were grateful because you were just having a great time and
I was alive.
And you were alive.
I was alive. I there was a real chance that I wouldn't have gone to college. I always say, like, if you have to have CF, you want it how I have it, because the reality is a lot of CFers aren't healthy enough to go to college. They're looking at lung transplants. They're in and out of the hospital, every month. It's really can be a really brutal, horrible disease. And so I feel like once I hit 30, I sort of realized, I have a voice, I'm alive, I can breathe today, and I'm going to fight for all the little kids who are just fighting to breathe today. I sort of took it on as like this personal mission of like, ooh, I have a voice. I can actually help the kids who are just lying in bed in the hospital, just doing all their airway clearance and just trying to breathe.
So for the last 8 years, it sounds like you've had this mission to promote or increase people's awareness and knowledge of CF. What sort of things have you been doing?
Well, it was interesting. It sort of unfolded organically. Like, people started coming to me and asking me to speak at CF events, and I sort of did one, and they asked me to do a couple more, and it just has all unfolded. And
I don't understand why, because you're not interesting to listen to at all. You're not engaging. You're kind of boring.
I hear that all the time. But most recently, I was in the hospital about 2 months ago, and my friend Nicole had started this Facebook group, and it's called Outrun the Odds on Facebook, but it turns out we now have started a nonprofit called Outrun 38, and we have this amazing momentum going, and we're able to spread the word for CF. I mean, CF is sort of one of these weird orphan diseases. There's 30,000 of us in the United States, 70,000, worldwide, and so we don't really get enough attention from the government. We get, NIH does some research for us, but really all the research comes from private funding. And, the everyday people who are willing to say, hey, here's $10, here's $100, whatever. I mean, I'm alive because of all those people, So it seems like to me what I hear from a lot of people is they know what CF is, but they don't really know what it is. And they have sort of heard about it. It's interesting to just get that awareness out there. And I think now that we're living longer, now we have more of a voice. And I think, another interesting thing is CFers are not allowed to be around each other. We can actually share bacteria with each other. So we can't actually even be 6 feet, close to each other.
Oh, that's so interesting.
So we could never do CF camps. You can never really have CF friends. So Facebook and the internet allows us to have our own community and talk to each other like, hey, does this go on with you? Or does this happen to you? We never had that before. I never knew any other CF people besides my cousins who had passed away. I mean, I just wasn't in my world. Now I'm like Facebook friends with all these other CFers.
And what's that been like?
Oh, it's amazing. And I think this is really important for therapists to know is that CF can be a really isolating disease because we spend so much time being sick or, I spend 2 hours a day doing airway clearance, and sometimes we're just too tired to go out and be social. So it can be really isolating. And because not that many people have CF, you sort of don't know, is it the same? Like, am I on this path? Am I going to have this happen? It's was really confusing. So now that I hear other people's life experiences, it's like, oh, okay. Oh, that's what that is. Oh, I didn't realize that symptom meant this. And, it's a way for us to educate ourselves on our own disease.
So Facebook and other social networks sounds like it's been an amazing connector for folks with CF because otherwise it's dangerous for you guys to come together.
Yep.
I remember working with somebody back in the 90s and the mom had post-polio syndrome, and so she had lost the use of her legs and was losing the use of her arms, and she was homebound, and this was in 96 and 97. And she said that it was the greatest time in her life, even though she was sort of basically homebound, because there were these things called chat rooms now. And she could sit on her computer, right, with the, probably Windows 3.1 or whatever it was, and just connect with all these people around the world that were experiencing the same thing she could. And she felt liberated, empowered, free, and not alone. Yeah. She felt connected.
Yeah. And in a moment where otherwise would have felt very disconnected. Yeah. And maybe scared. And so here you have all these people, helping you, supporting you. For me, a big time that I'm on the computer is 2 hours every day, an hour in the morning, an hour at night. I am on what's called my vest, which is this airway clearance machine that I didn't get until I was in my 20s. I mean, this is a new piece of medical equipment that I didn't have when I was a little kid. So again, part of becoming an adult with CF means you're independent. I don't have my mom coming over to my place every night to hit me on my back. So I put on this, it looks like a sort of life preserver, and it's hooked up with, these tubes, and it shakes me up. And that's how I do my airway clearance as an adult, as an independent adult with CF. But it takes me an hour in the morning and an hour at night. And I'm at the same time hooked up to nebulizers. So I'm doing my breathing treatments at the same time. And so it's really sort of a loud machine. I mean, my newer one is not as loud, but so it's really sort of difficult to listen to the TV or be doing anything. So that's my time. I go on Facebook, and that's when I'm connecting. I'm connecting to people on Outrun 38. I'm connecting to my CF friends. And it's also a nice way when you have CF, there's a lot of fatigue, a lot of just downtime. I spend a lot of time just resting, conserving energy. If I know I'm going to have a social event, I'm probably laying down for weeks ahead of time just so that I know I'm going to have enough energy to go to something that I really want to go to. So
and the lack, sort of the lack of energy or the decreased energy, is that because you're not getting enough oxygen because it's hard to breathe? Is it...
Well, we have to spend so much energy breathing every day. You know, we're coughing, that's energy. And to also add to my breathing problems, I also have cystic fibrosis related diabetes. So my sugars are crazy all day. So that requires a lot of attention, a lot of energy. And, you know, if your blood sugar crashes, you know, that throws off your whole day.
Now, I don't know much about diabetes. There's like salt diabetes and there's sugar diabetes. You said that there was the salt test for CF. Do you have salt related diabetes?
So there's type 1, type 2 diabetes, right? Those are sort of the typical types of diabetes that are with your blood sugars, right? So I have, which is like, it's sort of a rare thing, which CFers get, called cystic fibrosis related diabetes, CFRD, which is sort of a combination of type 1 juvenile diabetes and type 2. So it's sort of its own monster. And so for me, how it's complicated my life is that I run very low blood sugar. So I actually now have to wear this Dexcom, it's called, which is this implant that I have in my stomach, and it talks to this little thing that looks like a little iPod, and it's constantly reading my sugars throughout the day. And why it's really helpful for me is it has an alarm feature. So if I'm going too high or going too low, it's setting off an alarm. So for me, which is really important, because several times I have, without recognizing I was dropping, you know, going low with my blood sugars, I was like near coma. Like so low I couldn't even get to my orange juice. Couldn't get to, you know, and the orange juice is what I need to get out of a diabetic low. So having the Dexcom is having that little alarm saying you're dropping, you're going low, so that I don't hit, you know, like a near coma experience. But again, the Dexcom wasn't available, you know, 20 years ago. You know, again, I feel like I'm just lucky to be alive, and I'm only alive because of all these advances.
All these new technologies, they're amazing.
Yeah.
So really quickly, what is it like to have the vest?
So, well, the vest is amazing in that it allows me to be independent. Days that you feel like you're drowning in your mucus, I will sleep with it on.
Really?
Oh my God. I'm like waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, putting it on, because it's the only way to like help move all of it. Again, it's really thick, it's really sticky, and so we need help to move it all. When I'm in the hospital, I wear the vest 6 hours a day.
So what is it squeezing you? Is it thumping you? Is it?
Yeah. It's all of a sudden it like expands with air, so it's tight around your lungs. And looks like a life preserver. And then all of a sudden it has a percussion to it. So you can actually change the frequency and the intensity of the percussion. And so it is really sort of shaking you up.
Wow. And when you say percussion, you're not, of course, talking like really like cool beats. And,
yeah.
It's not like Pharrell is
well,
programming
however,
the
I
vest.
have been known to do music videos in the hospital with my vest on.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
Gotta
fantastic.
make it fun, you
Right?
know?
Why not?
That's
Yeah.
what I say. Or I call my nephew as I have my vest on, and my voice is like, and I say, "Hey, Mason, I love you." And all the nurses start laughing. They're like, "We heard you out in the hallway. That was so cute."
That is hilarious. So you decided to go to school for social work.
Yeah. Yep.
Did your experience with CF play into that at all?
Well, I'm sure in some way it did. I mean, I always knew I wanted to help people, and I think that was even a part of me even before I was diagnosed. I can remember being fascinated by Helen Keller and sort of people who were struggling with disabilities, and that was even before I had CF. So I think that there was a part of me that just is a helper by nature. But then to add the CF component, I definitely felt like I'm headed in that direction. I couldn't imagine myself doing anything besides, social work.
So what is it that you think social workers should know about CF, about working with folks with CF?
Yeah, that's a great question. So CF is not just a disease that affects our body, but it affects us, spiritually, emotionally. Imagine yourself being diagnosed with this fatal disease when you're a little kid. Imagine what that would feel like to know at such a young age and try to wrap your head around mortality. I can remember being a really deep thinker and not really having peers to quite understand sort of the concepts that you were trying to wrap your head around at such a young age. Or even parents who may experience their own guilt, their own denial, and also can't have those conversations with you. I can remember spending a lot of time just myself trying to figure out what this all meant. The other piece is it really is a lot of grief work. There are, besides dealing with just life and death, there are a lot of other issues of just like basic losses, like not being able to go to a party on a Friday night. It's actually a really interesting story. My cousin Mike, who had CF, had passed away and left me like $500 and said, I want you to spend it on something fun. Not books, not an education, fun. And so I spent that $500 and booked a trip to Cancun for spring break with my college girlfriends. And a week before I started getting sick, and my friends go, Liz, will you please go to the doctor? And I was like, no, we are going to Cancun. And they're like, please, Liz. This was back when I was totally in denial. Please, Liz, can you go to the doctor? I go to the doctor. They're like, you need to be in the hospital. And so I was hospitalized and I missed that trip to Cancun. And at the time, that was a big loss for me. So it's little and small, like these little losses add up over time where you start feeling like you're missing out. And as you're getting sicker, you're missing out on more and more and more. The other piece I think for therapists to understand is when you're dealing with adult CFers, I sort of came up with this term, what I call healthy sick. And the world really hasn't found a place for healthy sick people. A lot of us with CF, we recognize the importance of living and embracing a full life. We want to work. We want to have a job where we are able to take care of ourselves and not feel dependent on family members or friends. We want to have a job that might be meaningful, but most jobs want healthy employees where we need to be able to go in the hospital a couple times a year. We need to be able to take time off to go to the doctors to prevent going to the hospital. So the workforce really hasn't embraced a place for adult CFers yet. And because this is really a new frontier to actually be an adult CFer, we're still figuring this all out. And that has been a huge stress to think, not only do I have to try to take care of my CF, but now I have to try to figure out how am I going to pay my bills, how am I going to keep a job, how am I going to keep health insurance, because I'm going to need that, how am I going to do all that and be sick? And then add you're stressed, which of course causes inflammation, which of course is the last thing any CFer wants, is more inflammation. That's all we have.
I love that term, healthy sick, because it does apply to many people these days, not just with CF.
Right, exactly.
But go ahead.
So, for example, when I try to get on some short-term or long-term disability, like AFLAC or any of those, I could never get approved because I have a pre-existing condition, and if you've been in the hospital in the last year, which I'm in the hospital every year, you can't get approved. And who needs that life insurance, that health insurance and that disability more? Healthy sick people, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Is there anything about the Affordable Care Act and the policies that have been implemented in the last few years around not being able to deny people because of pre-existing conditions, about those things that...
I think we're getting better, and I've heard some other CFers have some positive experiences with that. So I think we're making progress, but part of our work is with the actual employers. Are we employable? Are we your desired worker? Probably not, yet we want to be. The problem is, for a lot of us with CF, we are dealing with a lot of chronic and persistent issues, but we may not be on our deathbed this moment, And so that may be something we have to think about, a lung transplant in the future. But as of today, I don't need one, but I'm still going in the hospital every, couple months or years. And so it's how do you manage that chronic illness in the workforce? And also with your friends and family, it's, being healthy, sick. Everyone wants you healthy for their function or their event, and you can't go to everything. And yeah.
Well, it must be hard to meet people, although you're sort of public now because of the Outrun 38, and lots of folks know you sort of as, Liz with CF. But I would imagine that before people know that you have CF, they wouldn't know there would be any reason why you might not be able to make it, because you look healthy, you're a runner,
exactly.
When
I went to college, I actually said, I'm not going to tell anybody I meet that I have CF. This was like my social experiment.
Wow.
Would people like me for me and not feel bad for me, right? And so I sort of said I wasn't going to tell anyone unless I had like a major hospitalization, which at that point I could pass and no one would know I was sick, and I hadn't been in a hospital that much. So I really thought I could go through my college career and not have to tell anyone. And I was there for not even a month and had a major hospitalization, fever, hallucination, ended up in the hospital. I mean, it was bad. And so I told probably about 8 girlfriends. And we're probably until in like my senior year. I mean, that was really sort of all the people who knew. I mean, we would be in stealth mode, like secretly going to the hospital. I had severe episodes of pancreatitis back in college. It's not a pleasant experience, but we did that all secretly.
Oh my God.
So I it was interesting. A lot of people would be like, they didn't know that I was going through that at all, because I did look really healthy. And I think a lot of CFers can look really healthy,
So if I had somebody come to me and she said, oh, I have CF, I'm healthy sick.
Yes.
I'm not sure if I should let folks know.
Right.
What would you suggest?
Disclosure.
Yeah.
This is sometimes telling people it's like coming out of the closet in a way. It is.
Of course.
It's this real private thing that is going to change how people look at you, may change how an employer looks at you, how a potential spouse or someone you're dating looks at you. So it really is that sort of scary experience of like, ooh, okay, here we go. And we have to psych ourselves up to tell people. I mean, disclosure of CF is certainly an issue that therapists should be aware of. Absolutely. And it will be unique to each person, but that's a big part of all this, how to tell people and when.
So you went almost your whole college career without being out to most people about it. Mm-hmm. Would you say that was a good idea? Are you glad that you did it? I know we can't generalize to everybody with CF, but
yeah,
for you?
I think at that point I was still really in denial about what this disease was, what it would mean for me, how I'd have to live my life with it. And so I think that my denial really was not helpful for me at that time. I think that CFers can either sort of maybe go 2 ways. One, sort of seeing things negative, maybe getting depressed or anxious, or being overly optimistic, and it doesn't affect me at all. And I sort of happen to be one of those, too optimistic people, and I think that was a problem. I think it really, there were many times I can look back like being, wow, I should have totally been in the hospital at that point, and I just couldn't, I don't know what it was. It was just, I thought that I could just suck it up and just keep going. And I couldn't. But it really took me many years to sort of break free of that denial. And that was really friends who really just were like, sitting down with me and talking to me for hours about like, this is real. You gotta really figure this out.
So maybe one of the decision points as a therapist is saying, is this person wanting to sort of be in the closet about their CF because they themselves are in denial and therefore putting themselves at risk?
Yes.
Or are they sort of accepting of their CF status and what that means, but they actually have concerns about being out for other reasons?
Yeah.
And that might be an important
Yes.
thing for somebody to suss out in with their client. Absolutely.
I think that saying that there are health risks to a person with CF in denial is a really good point. That being in denial could really could put a person in the hospital and take years off their life easily. Yeah.
So obviously there's the medical side that a therapist or a social worker would have to understand, and doing all the service coordination around the medical side would be important in terms of like the psychotherapy, some of the things that we were talking about. You mentioned other things like relationships and job and things like that. Are there any other things that you can think of that would be good for social workers who might be doing more of the psychotherapy side than the case management side?
Yeah, I think addressing the family system is really important. You could have a CFer who is not in denial, but the whole family is. How does that impact that person's ability to get care? Or, it gets really tricky because we sort of have to depend on people even though we may not want to. And then does that create a sense of burdening other people, or other people feeling like you are a burden, and telling you you're a burden? I mean, it's all those family dynamics, I think, are definitely something a therapist should look at and examine. And also, like the age of the diagnosis, how was the parent's response? It's really common that CF parents may sort of panic and sort of overprotect a CF kid, not let them do a lot of, quote, normal activities. CF kids who don't go to public school because a parent is too fearful of bacterias. And again, some of that is really reality-based. I mean, some CFers truly can't, which again, that's another loss, which I was talking about earlier. But looking at the mother and fathers separately, their own personal reactions and how they responded to the disease themselves, whether it was guilt or anything like that, and also how did they take care of that child during those early years towards adolescence, and then how are the parents managing young adulthood, sending their child to college? Is the child feeling equipped to be able to do that? Do they know how to access hospitals? Do they know what doctors to go to when they're young adult? Do they know how to order a vest? Do they know what CF clinic they're going to? Also, with the life expectancy being so young, is there trust? Is there some money set aside so in case your child isn't going to be able to have a career or take care of themselves financially, what is the plan? And I think a lot of families, because CF, it takes so much day-to-day care, like getting the meds, getting your treatments done, that it can be really hard to try to project what are the needs going to be when the person's 20, 30, 40.
That sounds overwhelming.
I mean... Right. On top of, wow, this is really hard to watch. Really hard to watch somebody I love be really sick.
Were you ever at a point where your family was like, I think Liz is going to die, and they kind of prepped for that?
No, I think that we all really experienced a lot of denial. I think CF was something really hard for my family to talk about. And so I don't think there ever was quite that panic. And also I have just been healthy enough that I don't think I ever alarmed them. Although I did have some hospitalizations where I did feel like, wow, if I leave right now, I would get it. I feel that sick. But I don't remember communicating that to anyone. Again, there's that, you're so sick that you can't communicate, one, and you can't breathe, which makes it hard to talk, and you're going through all this stuff internally that you almost can't say that to your parent, because in some weird way, the sick child is also protecting the parent. Some CF parents may experience their own depression, their own anxiety, and so the sick kid somehow ends up being the protecting kid. And so we might protect the parents from really how poorly we are feeling.
That's a tough position.
Right. But again, I think, my dad experienced his 4 cousins passing away. So I'm sure they were very in tune to that being a possibility. Frank DeFord, he was a sports journalist. He had a little girl, Alex, who had CF. And I want to say she died around, somewhere between 8 or 10 years old. And he had written a book, and there was a Lifetime movie. And that was the only information I had on CF as a kid, was this book and this movie. And here this girl dies at 10. That was it. That's all I had for information. And that was all my parents had for information. So I could only imagine how scary it was for them to get that diagnosis.
So what are some resources that are out there these days for parents, for professionals, for people living with CF or CFers, as you've been calling them?
Yeah.
That, other than the Frank DeFord book and made-for-TV movie kind of thing?
Well, I think we have the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, which is a great resource. They do the Great Strides walks all around the United States, and I think is sort of like the first go-to place that a lot of people, if you go online, might see. Nowadays, there are some really amazing books. There was one book in particular that I got probably when I was about 27, that I'll share with you the link. And I remember that being like a real oh my God, look at all this information. I didn't know that. It was like, I remember it just being like, I still go to that book as my go-to, I'm feeling this. What is that going to mean? It's sort of helping me predict what is going to happen. I have really used Facebook and talking to other CFers as a huge resource. There are a lot of groups that I think parents can go to. Something to be cautious about with some of the Facebook groups is some of them are highly offensive and mean-spirited and immature. And so you have young parents with a newly diagnosed 2-month-old kid going on looking for support, and CFers are responding in these really outlandish, offensive ways. So I'm just saying that to be cautious of what groups you're getting into. I have found Outrun 38 to be really interesting, that a lot of parents of CFers are reaching out to me, asking me questions. I always feel like it's really interesting for people to hear my story, because, for a parent who now has a 2-month-old who they get this diagnosis, I think there's so much fear and panic to hear my story, just as okay, allows them to take a deep breath for a moment.
Right, because you're successful, you're alive, you're able to live a life that they would want for their kid.
Right, exactly. So, but with that being said, I do have to remind people that not all CFers' lives look like mine. There are many out there who are not making it to 38 and needing transplants. And so I think we still have a long way to go. 38 is our life expectancy. It needs to be a cure. And really, we want CF to stand for Cure Found.
That's beautiful. Is there anything else that we should touch on? We've covered a bunch of things.
One other thing. So another reason we have fatigue is we actually have a hard time absorbing food and nutrients. And so we actually have to take enzymes before every meal. So I probably take about 5 pills before every meal, just so that I can absorb the right nutrition and enough fat, enough calories. A lot of CFers tend to be on the thin side. Our doctors are always asking us to fatten up, get fat, get chubby, because as you expand in weight, it actually expands your lungs. So you can breathe better and your lung function goes up with an increased weight. So trying to keep weight on is something really important, and getting the right nutrients. I also have to take vitamins. I take a special CF vitamin called 8X, A, D, E, and K. For whatever reason, we don't absorb those vitamins very well. And so on top of enzymes, I also take a couple inhalers every day. I take some antibiotics periodically, some like the Z-Pak. I take that all year round. I'm always on that. I don't ever stop, because for whatever reason that helps with inflammation with CFers. I have to take, steroids at time. I have to do sinus rinses. A classic sign that a kid might have CF is we have nasal polyps. And so that's actually one of the first signs that they knew I had CF is I had nasal polyps. And it was like, oh, we know what that means. So,
what is a nasal polyp?
It's like a little bump in your nose. And so it blocks your nose, and it can actually cause your nose to if it goes on and on forever, it can actually cause deformity of your nose because and changing your nasal passages. A lot of sinus problems. So I've had a couple sinus surgeries because it's literally all that thick mucus is also now in all your sinus cavities, and so they literally go in and scrape out your nasal cavities. Yeah, so you're managing your sinuses on top of it. And so it's, and then managing the diabetes all day, insulin if you need that. So like just the regular, maintenance on a healthy sick day is a lot. And so I think for people to know that even a healthy day for a CF person is a lot of work.
Oh, and as you're talking about it, it makes sense that if you're anything but healthy, like hospitalization, the kind of intensive treatment, like you couldn't do that on your own. Like you couldn't manage that. Like if this is what you have to do when you're doing well.
Right, exactly.
Like when you're not doing well, I can't even imagine. Like you just couldn't do it outpatient.
Yeah. And then eventually you need, like I was saying, 6 hours of vest in the hospital, which, that's a lot of work. Plus you're doing your IVs in the hospital and all your other treatments. So and you're just trying to rest. You're just trying to let your body relax. Like a lot of times, this is actually probably an interesting point for a therapist to know. Like I can get into a mode where I am just I can feel myself getting sicker and sicker, but I'm like, just push through it. Just get to the weekend. You can rest all weekend. Just keep it going. You'll get better. And then finally, like the doctor or I will make the decision, like, okay, you need to be in the hospital. And then it's finally like you click into, okay, I don't have to fight it anymore. I don't have to resist it. Now I can just relax and focus on healing. And there's something about going in the hospital too that's like you don't have to fight so hard. Now I can just focus on getting better. But for healthy sick people, that's also stressful because now is that how many sick days have you added up for the year? Who's going to pay your mortgage that month? The work that's piling up on my desk right now, So going in the hospital, as much as that's, you don't have to fight it, there still is all those other things that you're trying to manage.
Nothing stopped.
Right.
I still have to do 2 weeks worth of work.
Exactly. Yeah. So for a lot of people with CF, like for many years, I never took a vacation because I needed my vacation time to be a vacation in the hospital. I used to sort of joke around. I'm at Yale Hotel, going to the spa, and that was my vacation. That was how my vacation time was used.
It's such an interesting reframe. Because when you talk about going to the hospital, I think a lot of folks think about, okay, going to the hospital, like there's an ambulance, like it's sad, it's depressing, it's like awful, it's like life or death. But when you say like, the vacation, it almost sounds like a coping strategy to be like, you know what, this is something I'm doing that is healthy.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Like, just in the same way that I might go to the Bahamas for 2 weeks. Yes. Boy, that would be nice. I've never done that. Would love to do that. But if I did, that would be like resting up.
Yes.
Now that I'm back, I'm like got all this energy. Yes, there's all of this sort of stuff. That's an interesting reframe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, but part of the loss is now I don't get time to actually go to the Bahamas.
Right.
So,
and you might actually lose your job.
And I might lose my job.
Which is huge.
Yep. So even when you're healthy, now you're stressed because you're thinking, how long can I keep this up? Before I end up back in the hospital again. And so it's, having having a support system, having a therapist, I think is really important pieces at different points in a CFer's journey. So, I think it's really important that therapists know sort of the ins and outs of it, because it's not just like, oh, this person is dying from CF. There's this lifetime of experiences that may be difficult to navigate when you're in it. And so having someone help you through that is a critical thing.
So you've talked a little bit about Outrun 38, the Facebook page. Why running?
So running for me has become this thing where all of a sudden my lungs open up and I can take in a deep breath and I feel strong, I feel powerful, and I feel like I am beating the CF. Like I'm out there and I'm imagining like just kicking CF ass. Like it's this really powerful experience. And so I think it was like 2008, I had been running maybe 3 miles here or there. And, I was a gymnast growing up and a dancer. And so, being active was a really important part of my life. And I think a part of why I am as healthy as I am. And my parents were great in letting me do all that, But in 2008, I remember sitting on the beach with my friends and I said, I'm going to run a half marathon. And they're like, no, you're not. And I was like, I am.
This is the optimistic part of living, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? And I'm like, I am. They're like, well, if you do it, then I'll do it. And so I ran my first half marathon with my friend Kim up in Portland, Maine. And we crossed the finish line together. And I ended up going back to the doctors, and my lung functioning had actually improved. And which is, the belief was always, lung damage was permanent lung damage, and here I was sort of making a reverse on some of that lung functioning. And so It was like, okay. And my doctors were like really continued to encourage me to run, which is interesting because a lot of my friends and family are like, I don't know, you shouldn't do that, you're going to really exhaust yourself, it's not good for you. And I'm like, no, you don't understand, it is great for me. So running and any form of exercise for a person with CF is not only just you get all the regular health benefits, but it actually is improving our lung functioning. So running has become for me how I am able to postpone, delay, or prevent altogether a lung transplant. So I ran that half marathon. I had trained for a full marathon, ran up to 20 miles, and then got sick 2 weeks before my actual marathon. So hopefully one day I'll be able to do that. And then I ran another half marathon with my brother, who's an amazing runner. So when he finished, he came back around and got me, and we crossed that finish line together. And now I'm actually training for another half marathon, which will be right around my 38th birthday, which is the life expectancy for CF. So it will be a very meaningful run, and a lot of outrunners will be there running with me. So when I run, I just imagine not only what I'm doing to fight CF, but I imagine what that experience is going to be like, all of us doing that together. But so any form of exercise really is critical for CFers. So it's definitely something to encourage. Of course, we all have to listen to our bodies and know when to rest. That's equally as important. But certainly go ahead and encourage the CF people to get active in any way they can.
Of course, doing it while making sure they're talking to their medical providers.
Absolutely. It's not a substitution
Yeah.
for your vest. I learned that one the hard way.
Did you try and be like, I'm not going to use my vest?
Yeah, exactly. I was like, this will be, replace the vest time with running. And my doctor said, no, all of that mucus is still creeping into all those little airways into your lungs that running won't get it out of. You still need to do the vest on top of your exercise. So certainly continue to talk to your doctors about your exercise because like for me, my diabetes, trying to manage my diabetes through running, we also have what's called like mucus plugs where all of a sudden I'm literally clogged, like blocked. And so you literally can't breathe. And so that's happened to me like miles away from home.
Wait, so wait, what happens?
It's called a mucus plug. And so literally the mucus just sort of gets jammed in the airway and can't move. Again, it's really thick. It's more thick than the average person, this mucus. And so
So you can't breathe at all?
Yeah, you're like barely breathing. I mean, you're getting enough in, but you can't take a deep breath in. You certainly can't run at that point. It's stuck. It's blocked. It's plugged.
Sounds terrifying.
It is. And I didn't know what was happening to me the first time it happened. I was like, what is this? And I came home and I threw on my vest probably for like the next 3 hours. And it was really scary. It was really, I was just like, oh my God, what is happening? And then my doctor was like, yeah, that was a mucus plug.
So could you have died there? I mean, do people die from that?
I mean, I don't think you die from it, but it's certainly a reason people might end up in the hospital. If you can't clear that, that is, can cause further inflammation and infection and damage. So the goal is to unplug it and move that mucus and get that airway clearance going. So certainly there are risks to running and exercise, but working with your CF team to look at and examine those risks, I think is certainly beneficial because what any form of exercise can do to improve our lung functioning is definitely worthwhile.
It's one of those things it's sort of seems counterintuitive, right?
Right.
People are like, okay, don't tax your lungs. Don't do anything that might stress it out. But your experience was actually, no, this is helping.
Yeah.
And I suspect it's probably something that because you are on the cutting edge of adult CFing.
Yeah. Yep.
that there are a lot of things you are doing that people haven't done before.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I have seen now that I can see people on Facebook and other CF people. I've seen CF people running with an oxygen tank, biking with an oxygen tank.
Wow.
Near transplant, still fighting the good fight. And that inspires me. I look at them and I think, oh, God, if they can do it, I can do it.
That's fantastic. Man, yeah, this disease is not going to stop me.
That's right. That's right.
What is your goal with Outrun 38, and what is it that people can do if they're excited about some of the things that you've talked about and want to know more and want to be a part of that? How do they do that?
So you can go to outrun38.org to check us out, or find us on Facebook, which is Outrun the Odds. Our sort of line for all this, because there's so many parts to Outrun 38, is that it's friends, supporting healthy living, supporting a cure for cystic fibrosis. I mean, really, it's a bunch of friends or new friends through Outrun who are encouraging each other to get healthy and be fit by running, walking, swimming. All people need to do is log their miles. We're not asking for money. We're just asking for your participation and your miles. So it's a great place for people just to get support for, themselves as they're getting fit, or I think one of the exciting parts of Outrun is I think people get so much support even if it's just their first mile or they ran 1 mile. You don't have to be a marathon runner to be a runner. You put one foot in front of the other, you are a runner. So, we support the fitness, and it's a place to, talk about community and friendship. And ultimately, it's a place where we want to find a cure for cystic fibrosis.
That's great. Liz, thanks so much for taking the time to talk about CF, CFers, treatment, the experience of being a a person with CF and a social worker,
Yeah.
and for all those insights. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having the time to do this. Yeah.
I'm Jonathan Singer, and thanks for being with me today for another episode of the Social Work Podcast. If you missed an episode or have suggestions for future episodes, please visit socialworkpodcast.com. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit our online store at cafepress.com/swpodcast. To all the social workers out there, keep up the good work. We'll see you next time at the Social Work Podcast.